all of the most important, consumer companies over the last 25 years. And you're like, replaces it.
Yep. You've been out there for quite a while now, right? Like, was it 13 years you said?
Yeah, 13. So we moved out here in 2010. Okay. And yeah, at the time it was just, literally like, we want to live in the mountains. We want to live in Europe. My wife is from Dublin originally. And so it was like, okay, we're going to go somewhere in Europe. And we kind of just went, okay, here's the arc of the Alps. Like, what do we know of in this area?
Right.
And we did all this research, and we had like a big spreadsheet, and we had like 5 or 6 different places. And then we were like, all right, we're going to go for our 2-week, American holidays to go do a, reconnaissance type thing. And we came here first, and we just didn't go to anywhere else. We were just like, nope, this is it. Wow. We're done.
And it sounds like a lot of it was the scenery, or kind of the goal to be in the mountains. But like, did you find community there? Like, did you find other people, your same interests or families, same ages or something?
Yeah, actually. And to be honest, like, I don't think if we had not found that, we wouldn't be here, because it is like an amazing place to live. But without having that community and like having friends, and especially not having any of, the rest of our families here, it meant that we sort of had to build our own surrogate family. And so, right. Yeah, very luckily we met a ton of people who are into lots of, similar things. And, ends up we've got kind of 4 or 5 different families around here that we basically spend most of our time with. And, between skiing in the winter and, hiking and running and climbing, and a couple of them do a lot of kite surfing and stuff. So, yeah, it's good.
Are they also mostly transplants, or are there some locals, or?
No, it's almost all locals, actually. There are very few transplants here. Like, there's very few, any sort of expats. There's me, my wife, one other of our like real close group who's actually Irish as well, but married to a local guy. And then like maybe one handful of other people there, but it's not many.
Are you kind of like this outsider kind of weirdo with all these like strange ideas you collected on the internet, and they're kind of like living?
Definitely. Definitely.
How does that work? Like, are they curious about it, or they're just like, oh, that's that crazy Jeff guy. Anyway, he's good.
I think most people are curious. They're curious straight off the bat, because it's like, wait, you are American, but you moved here? What are you doing? Like, everybody goes the other direction. Like, no one gets it. They're just like, why would you want to live here? And then once they kind of, okay, you like to ski. Okay, I guess this makes a little bit of sense. And they're like, well, what do you do for work? And I'm like, oh, I work in my attic on the internet. And they're like, oh no, here we go.
What do they do for work? Are they like involved in like the ski industry or something, or?
It's like various things. I think, one of the things that benefits this area a ton is that we're really close to the Swiss border. And so St. Moritz is about an hour away. And so a lot of people around this area work in the hospitality industry of one shape or form. So I've got a good friend who like runs an HR department at one of the 5-star hotels up there, and a couple other people that actually are like electricians or stuff that work in the, industry up there. But the benefit for them is the salaries in Switzerland are way better. And there's a border worker thing called the frontaliero. And when you're a frontaliero, you don't pay tax in Italy. And so they end up making way better salaries and paying way less tax than, their counterparts in Italy. And so it's a really good deal. Everybody's kind of much better off here than in a lot of, other places in Italy.
Right. And then do you talk to them at all about Nostr? Like, do you get to that level of detail?
Yes.
Like, do they know what Listr is? Do they know any?
I don't think anybody knows about Listr yet, but like, like my 2 closest friends, like we talk about all this stuff, and they're like super into it. And I've orange pilled both of them, and I think they kind of are like, whatever you say, Jeff, like you just tell us what to do. We're probably going to do it. Like, we get it. Like, that's your world, and drag us along wherever it makes sense. I don't like. People just aren't really on tons of social media and stuff here. And so I think there is kind of a disconnect. And I noticed this when we moved to Italy as well. Like, it kind of has always felt like it's about 10 years behind a lot of the rest of the, world in terms of, and mostly in terms of like the internet stuff. Right. So I remember like we moved here, there was no Amazon, there was no, like, it was very hard to get stuff, delivered online and things like that. And that's like all slowly come in, the quality of the internet's gone up a ton since we've been here. But it's still like, it's behind, right? Like, you go to Miami or San Francisco or, London, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm used to. And then you come back home and I'm like, okay, yep, back to normal.
Right. Does that get frustrating, or is that like, you're accustomed to it now? You've been there long enough and you kind of know that's the real way it should be for you?
Yeah, like I'm accustomed to it. Like it's like all the shops shutting like for 3 hours in the middle of the day. Like at the beginning, it's really annoying, and then you just get used to it and you don't think about it anymore. And you look down, you're like, oh, it's 12:30. I missed the shop. I'm gonna have to wait till 3. But you stop being annoyed by it. So yeah, like I don't, and like now Amazon's amazing in Italy, so like that's kind of not a problem, and the internet's gotten really good.
Even
so
in
that's
the
not a
mountains,
problem.
you can get stuff like within a few
overnight.
days or...
Yeah.
Oh,
Like
wow.
sometimes it's overnight. Like it's very quick. And we are benefited from the fact like we're quite close to Milan. We're only an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half from Milan. Yeah, we've got kind of the major, infrastructure of Italy's kind of industrial hub pretty close. So yeah, like we're the end of the line, but we're still close enough that, that line reaches us on a daily basis easy.
Right. Cool. And then you mentioned Bitcoin, you sort of orange pilled these people. Do they, are there sort of like government questions or kind of currency questions, or is there any of that stuff top of mind locally in Italy or maybe across the European Union, or would you characterize that stuff?
Yeah. And I wonder, all the Italians that will listen to this will probably give out to me later, but I'll go ahead and muck through this one. So my kind of experience with it and my kind of feeling from Italians is that like in general, Italy's been a country for a little over 150 years. They've had an absurd number of different governments in those 150 years. They tend to switch governments on procedural bases on a really regular basis. And so it's kind of this like almost running joke that, if you don't like it, just wait a little bit. They're not going to be able to get anything done anyways, because they're going to be in gridlock. And so whatever, it's not that big of a deal. Their politicians like Berlusconi, like totally scandalous. Like every part of the Italian political system is a joke. Like it's a very, very big legislative branch. And so because of that, it's just very chaotic. And so I think like most Italians just kind of put it out of mind almost. I think like the Bitcoin question from, a tax and like usage perspective is a little bit, it's actually a little bit more permissive than some other places in Europe. I feel like Italians are still very into cash. And actually like Italy's prime minister right now is like pushing back on the EU because the EU is basically trying to turn off cash completely. Probably heading towards CBDC
or?
Probably. Yeah. They just want more control, and, it's always the security theater of KYC and AML and all this nonsense. But Italy is like the one nation that's like, no, we're not going to like just go to zero immediately. Like they keep trying to keep the limit higher, and it does keep coming down. But, they're maybe the ones that are pushing back, at least, from my opinion. And I think because of that, like Bitcoin sort of fits, right? They kind of are like, they get it a little quicker, I think, than a lot of other places. And there are a couple places in Italy, like there's a place over in Trento Alto Adige that's been a circular economy for years. They've got probably 100 different merchants that accept Bitcoin over there. So I think it's definitely odd. And a lot of people are like, I don't know, what is this magic internet money? But at the same time, I think culturally, once they get once it clicks and they're like, oh, I understand what this thing is and what it isn't, it's not a, crypto trader degen thing. It's money, it's cash. Then it all of a sudden is like, oh, okay, now I understand why this might be beneficial.
Right. And then on the Nostr stuff, are there like concerns around social media? Do they see censorship? Do they see like kind of corruption in kind of the, election systems? Are there any of the kind of like the popular narratives maybe that at least I'm familiar with in the US? I assume they're kind of popular worldwide, but are those concerns or things that people know about or care about or discuss actively?
Not really. And again, this might be more of a function of like where I live and how rural it is in terms of, whether this stuff comes up a ton. I think like everywhere, there's a big concern over big tech and, kind of data privacy and stuff like that. The joke in Italy is that you literally have to sign a form, a paper form for data privacy every single time you do anything. And so it's almost just a joke. It's just like, oh yeah, here I am signing my privacy away again. Like, don't even know what I'm signing anymore because I've done it so many times. But it is definitely something, in mind, I think more against the big tech angle of things than censorship or anything like that.
Got it. So it's kind of a way to push back against big tech.
And to be honest, like, I think, we were talking about this at Nostrica a little bit, like to me, the the sort of censorship resistant thing is never the selling point for Nostr. When you're trying to like purple pill someone, like you never start there unless they're a deplatformed journalist. And then you're like, oh, okay, I've got something for you. But like, that's not most people. And so like most of the time it's much more fun to go, this is like a social media thing that's much smaller. It's not algorithmically driven by some giant company. And there's this really cool thing where you actually earn real money. You earn Bitcoin by just engaging with people and like just having fun. And most of the time that kind of will pique someone's interest and they're like, what? That seems bizarre, but okay, show me. Yeah.
Right. That's cool. Yeah. So it's almost kind of touches on that idea of what are the things that people, kind of run towards instead of run away, is I think kind of a commonly quoted phrase. And, and I thought I saw you maybe write a note a few days ago. And I think I've heard like Pablo talking about this. I think I saw Artur was talking about this, how, instead of trying to think of Nostr as trying to win users, think of Nostr as trying to win like more developers, or maybe creators writ large, whether that's, software developers, designers, content creators, whatever, anybody who wants to contribute in a way to like make something that makes Nostr better, and try to figure out how to appeal to those people instead of kind of like trying to appeal to, kind of somebody who's mostly about consumption, or what you might call like an average user. But I wonder if you sort of, how you've sort of developed that idea, or if you've sort of been talking to other people about that idea, and how does that resonate? Yeah,
I mean, it totally resonates. I think I wrote that note just like a couple hours ago. But yeah, I mean, it's something like I was hanging out with Pablo in Miami last week at the Bitcoin conference. And I mean, this is something that we talk about all the time, which is like, how does this develop? How does this build? What's the right way, or the way that allows it to become what we sort of think it wants to be, or what we all hope it will be. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion at all that we get this, open, decentralized protocol, going into the future. Like it could easily be broken by any number of things. So I think at this point, well, and then I guess the other piece to the question, where did this kind of come from? So my first kind of classic startup experience was working for a company called Intercom, which was started it was back in 2011, I think. I was the fourth employee there, so I was very early, and I was there for 8 years, and we went from 4 people to almost 700 people in that time. So it was like classic rocket ship ride. Everything's up and right. It's all VC funded. Like it was great. And so the first couple of years I was kind of working more on the customer side of things, but then the last 2 years I was there, I basically was trying to stand up the Intercom app marketplace. And so we had always had APIs, but we were all of a sudden kind of making the shift, or deciding to take the step to go, no, we're going to build an app marketplace on top of, the Intercom product. And so I worked directly with 2 product teams on that. And basically the founders were just like, figure out what we need to do. Like, we're not sure where to go. We're not sure who we want to partner with. We're not sure how to like bootstrap a marketplace. And so I spent a ton of time just digging in on all the details and trying to understand like what makes marketplaces work and what makes platforms function. And it's fascinating. Like it's one of the most fun areas, I think, because it's a very like meta question, right? Like making a product work is one thing, making a, thing where other people are going to make products work is a totally separate thing.
Right. Yeah. And so from that experience, go ahead.
I was going to say, like from that experience, that was basically, I think the lens that I look at a lot of this stuff through, and that I think is where we're at with Nostr, is like, we have a bootstrap problem. We have a chicken and egg problem of, we've got this thing that's pretty straightforward, pretty simple to build on top of. We've got a really core, excited group, using it on a daily basis, but it's still very, very small. Like when you look at the, high quality in-pubs posting stuff on Nostr.band stats and stuff, it's still low. Like it's a couple thousand people, which I actually think is a benefit right now. Like I think that's not, I'd be really upset actually if it was still just like hockey sticking up, because I'd be like, oh, it's screwed. Like there's no way we're going to pull this one out. But the way it is now, I think we have time and a bit of space to sort of, as a smaller community, decide on how we want to go forward, what are the ideals that we actually are going for. Like I saw, Will from Damas today had a note that was like saying, we actually don't want relays to handle delete requests. Like that's a bad thing long term. And I think that's semi-controversial still. And I hope we get to a point where like, everybody's just in agreement that we're all like, no, actually that is the right way. And there's some really good reasons why that's the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that there's a lot still to be figured out in like, what should it be? Like, we don't just want to recreate the patterns of what the old systems did. We want to kind of redefine what these systems are given their other foundational nature, kind of fundamental nature. But I wonder if like, are there hypotheses maybe that you have around what kinds of things should be built here to showcase stuff that can really only work here, that works better here than it would in other places? Like, you know, maybe there is like I don't know, like an open source. I mean, I'm just, you know, literally making this up as I go along, but like, is there an open source intercom like thing that would actually get more people excited about building more enterprise software, and each of them could monetize their own piece, but the back end or the kind of like the core software offering is more of an open source thing, and there's like commercial bits around it? Like, is that something that would help kind of usher in more, or is it like the new consumer product experience that you have in mind that you just wish thing X were built by somebody and then you think it would really take off? Or how do you think about sort of what you'd like to see built and what you think has promise at helping the Nostr ecosystem galvanize?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's funny, I'm kind of laughing there because like Pablo has already built the little chatbot thing. And I was just like, oh yeah, I mean, obviously it was going to be Pablo, which I mean, amazing that he did that. You know, I know what is under the hood there. So I know that like the chatbot piece is actually by far the easiest of all the chunks, right. But all the same. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different things that, or a couple of different ways that I think about this. Like one is there's that axis of like, we need some time and space to figure out as like a builder community. And kind of back to what I was saying before is like, we almost shouldn't be trying to entice new users into the system, the consumer users. We should be only looking for people who are creators or, you know, builders of some sort. And that's not just software, that could be designers, PMs, like people that create content or whatever it is. But those are the people that sort of get to put the thing together. And then later on, when everybody piles in, you want to have that solid foundation there. So I guess that's one piece. In terms of how I see like products that get built here, I'm like, I think the thing I'm most conscious about is like, how do we get this to the point where it's sustainable in a reasonable amount of time? And I think like VC funding goes a long way in this sort of thing because it really just pushes, you know, that death point, you know, way out into the future. And VCs are happy to be underwater for quite a while. Like they're playing a long game. That's how it works. And so to a large degree, like VCs and grants are really, really good for getting us through this, you know, period in the early days. I wonder how long that can go on. I mean, maybe that's a much longer term thing. Maybe that gets us through like many years. I think it's hard though, like unless you've got some really high conviction VCs, you know, like you and Max doing the investing that you guys do. I think, you know, some of the more standard VCs come in and they're like looking for those like revenue milestones and like a specific pattern of things to happen in a certain order. And like, we don't know that at all. We're like, we don't know how we're going to build people. Like, it's not like we just are like a SaaS business and everybody knows the model and everybody knows exactly what the curve is going to look like. We're like, I don't know. Can you run a business on Zaps? Does that work? Like, are we going to be able to fund anything by that? So I think for now, we need to focus on building tools for ourselves and developer tools to make it easier to build, but also selling to each other, you know, our own built creations and things like that to just better understand, you know, which models are going to work, which are going to break, which ones actually, you know, provide enough revenue. And there'll be, I think in all that experimentation and messing, there'll be a few things that pop out and kind of go, oh, interesting. You know, like when the first SaaS companies came around, like no one was doing that. And like when one or two of those broke through, everybody kind of clued in and was like, okay, this is a totally new way of thinking about how to charge for software.
Yeah.
And so I think we've got a lot of that to do first, and then we'll get to probably the consumer apps next, because it's kind of easier to do a simple, straightforward, really exciting consumer thing. And then the enterprises and things are always the last, right? Like they are the slowest to adopt new technology. They have, you know, big budgets and they're great to sell to, but it really, you can only get in there once it's pretty mature.
Right. I've wondered a lot, are there examples of tools that we could use or would use from the outside world that are maybe more one-way reader-like experiences that could be kind of brought to a Nostr-focused audience, and the conversations around those tools could happen on Nostr, even if the content isn't de novo built on Nostr. So an example, you know, might be, I mean, I guess some of this happens in like YouTube, like if you post a video on YouTube and not in like a Nostr.build video format, it's kind of outside the ecosystem, but consumable. And, you know, you can get zaps on the node where the YouTube video lives. And it's a little bit of a clunky connection, but you can imagine those types of connections being smoother. Or the one that I have been proposing, I'm still trying to get, I think Oscar Mary from Fountain is interested in this space, which is very close to his product area. But I want to have a podcast consumption client where I can listen to any podcast. Doesn't matter if it's like knows about Nostr or not, it's just RSS feed. But then I can like push moments from that podcast to Nostr notes with highlights and my additional thoughts on it. So I think there's experiences that in a sense don't require all kinds of new content, but require new conversations among us, the people who care about Nostr, to emerge around any topics, even if they're stuff that we're not necessarily, they're not like Nostr focused topic. Like we're talking about trail running or hiking. You know, those are not Nostr topics, but they actually kind of may pique other people's interest, or other people might kind of gather and find a home there. So that's like one of my hypotheses that I don't think we've really scratched much of it yet, but that's kind of one of the things I'd like to see more of.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and I think like the reason I went all in on Nostr in the first place was just seeing it and like sort of grokking the basics of it and like very quickly getting past the, like, this is just social media. It was like, as soon as my brain went over that cliff of like, it's more than social media, it was just like, oh my God, this is literally everything. Like, you know, you just kind of go through the list of like all of the most important, you know, consumer companies over the last 25 years. And you're like, replaces it, you know, it's like all of them. And I think because of that, you know, kind of interoperability across the entire stack of all those tools, where that was definitely not the case in Web 2. That just opens up all sorts of stuff that there's no way we could predict what'll happen. Right. Like what you were just describing with the podcast stuff sounds like highlighter for audio, you know, like Pablo built for text. And I think those are really, really powerful tools. And like, it's really hard to use them right now. And it's kind of, you have to really squint to like understand like what this might do in the future. But I totally agree with you. Like, I think this is the time where we should be building as many, I mean, ultra ugly, barely functioning, you know, apps like that for other builders who are going to be, you know, gracious about how broken it is. But they're still going to pound on it, and they're still going to give you solid feedback, and they're still going to care enough to, you know, dig in. I think that's exactly what we need right now.
How do you think about I think we're both probably, you know, we could call ourselves purple pilled, and we're probably big Nostr promoters, you know, probably stuff about the architecture and the structure that's appealing to our worldview, or kind of on how technology is developed. But, you know, I think there's a bunch of different competing ways that similar ideals are attempting to be served. And so let's say, like, you know, I think Mastodon has existed for a long time, and I think it's got its flaws and problems. You know, Blue Sky is another approach that's a very different set of assumptions, but like, you know, aiming after like the same goal. I wonder, are there anything in the others, you know, the non-Nostr set of things that are attempting to reach kind of this open protocol like goal that are grabbing your attention, or kind of have, you know, even some part of your mind share on this?
To be honest, no. And like, I'm the kind of classic early adopter. Like, I love technology just for technology's sake. I love to play with new things, and like more than, I mean, I'm like always in the alpha if I can get in and like, you know, play with stuff. I love giving feedback to product teams and things. And I've never, like, I've seen all of those tools, and like played with probably, you know, at least a good chunk, you know, the majority of them. And none of them has grabbed my attention the way that Nostr did. And I think it's the difference between, in a lot of cases, and I know there's a few other kind of, I mean, I'm sure Ravel could tell me like 24 that are a little bit more like Nostr that I don't know about. But, you know, there's the difference between like the cathedral style of building and the bazaar style of building, of like, you know, embracing the chaos and letting the emergent properties kind of show themselves. That's kind of the most exciting for me. And it's, I think if you had asked me this like same kind of thing 10 years ago or something, I would have been like, that's never going to work. Like, there's just no way that's going to work.
So you've shifted your beliefs on that. What caused you to?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, like working in a classic Web 2 startup where you've got very structured product teams and you've got very top down sort of, the taste is made from the product lead and, right on down. I think you do get a really good appreciation for how hard it is to build really, really great products. And it takes a lot. Like, it's not an easy thing to really get to a place of like a very refined product that feels amazingly easy to use and is valuable and all the rest. But you lose a lot in that, right? Like, you are, by necessity narrowing to the narrowest set of things you can do because you're not that big of a team, in sum total. You don't have all that much time and you're doing things, to perfection every single time. I think the sort of free market, everybody chips in and like everything comes out a little bit, haywire. You're obviously sacrificing some of that perfection, but what you gain is just a much broader range of possible outcomes. And maybe this is me getting older, I don't know, but like that feels way more important to me now than what we've seen over the last like 15, 20 years, which is just like everything being driven right to the middle. And I mean, not in the middle in terms of like, we're in the middle of this political spectrum or anything, like we're getting driven out to the edges, but everybody's getting driven into, very, I guess, very precise, very narrow widths of like what they're allowed to see or believe or think about. And so I think it's probably pretty imperative at this point for us to just go, nope, like one, we need to stop as humans just thinking we can control everything. Like we've been proven wrong on that on like so many different areas. Just like give up, know that it's going to be a mess to some degree, but like actually that's part of the beauty of it. Yeah, exactly. Get comfortable
with the chaos.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. I've always thought that the centralized, kind of product development process is really good at getting something started because it just like galvanizes all of the resources needed and kind of prioritizes the top 3 most important things. But you miss out on the depth and diversity of different, small little niche things that in sum total may end up being more important than the core. So if, you look at like the Linux operating system has proven to be like the most important operating system in the world. And I think it's hard to do that top down, as Microsoft, or to do that as, Sun, used to try to do that with Solaris. I mean,
I'd say there's people out there who would probably argue that Linus is pretty top down, but I get your point.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely a bigger group of people contributing. Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of people who care about the success of it and can really imbue their own, I guess, perspective on it versus everything has to be just the one way that he wants it to be.
Yeah. And the beauty is like everybody is at their own, I guess you can, at any point you can just fork it and walk away and go, nope, I want to do it differently, and that's awesome. Right. Like that, having that choice and knowing you've got that door that allows you to just go, nope, all the stuff I've worked on, I get to take with me and keep working on it in my own direction. And you don't get that at like a closed tech company. They're like, here's your NDA. Now get out and you're like not allowed to work for any competitor now for the next couple of years.
Right. But your sort of journey, was it just kind of getting older and shifting perspective, or was there like a moment where you saw like something magical and you were like, oh yeah, okay, like this other way that I used to sort of dismiss is actually better?
I think I mean, this is going to sound a little bit trite maybe to this audience, but like, I think it was Bitcoin, right? Like seeing a system with no leader and a system that doesn't technically have any one group that has like, ultimate power over any other group. It's all completely open. It's all completely by choice, and it functions really, really well, and it continues to function. When you see that and when it goes through multiple waves and has attacks from all sides, it gives you a lot more faith in the emergent properties of things. And you're like, actually, maybe this is a thing. Whereas before, I think I would have been more along the lines of like, that can't work. I couldn't see it.
Right. So it sounds like you were talking about orange pilling your neighbors, and it sounds like you are kind of a big believer in Bitcoin, and that sort of maybe it was a launching off point for your belief in Nostr. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure.
Give you some of the same foundations.
Well, yeah, it's some of the same foundations. Like I think at the time when I joined on Nostr, like I remember, there were no zaps. Like it was everybody pasting lightning invoices into notes and things like that. But there was, I mean, it was already clear. It was like, the core people were Bitcoiners, and a lot of the ethos was the same. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a lot of that there.
So when you decided to go all in on Nostr, as you've termed it, and I've heard other people use that same phrase, how did you decide that to do that with Nostr, but you hadn't previously decided to do that with Bitcoin? Was it like a life stage or something about Nostr that is kind of more appealing to you to kind of go all in on than to go all in on Bitcoin development?
I struggled with that actually a lot before I started the last company I started a couple of years ago. And at the time I was kind of like, it was really like, I mean, not quite a coin toss, but it was like, I was sitting there going, okay, I know I really want to, be in Bitcoin. I've worked at sort of more traditional, just like general tech startups for a bunch of years now. I feel like I've learned a ton. And, I want to work on something that I actually deeply, deeply care about and like feel like I could work on for forever. And I think at the time it was kind of this feeling of like, do I make the big, shift to something that is, still like it's technology, but it's quite different technology. And so the shift to Bitcoin felt like a pretty big kind of career change, or am I going to try and start my own company and, do kind of a venture funded startup? And the idea that I was pursuing with that company was actually around personal finance, and it was sort of tangentially related to, Bitcoin. But, I kind of went that direction because it was I'd always said, like, if I have an idea where I feel like this is something I could work on for the next, 15 years and be really happy, and I feel like it really needs to exist, then that's the thing I know I should go find some funding for and try. And so that's the direction I went. And again, when that sort of was winding down, at the beginning of this year, it was like, okay, well, I guess I know where I'm going next. And so I was kind of poking around, and I think that must be where I kind of bumped into Nostr. And then once, like I said, once you go over the cliff and you see how broad it is and, its connection to Bitcoin, you're kind of going, okay, no, this is like a brand new thing that has got a huge amount of potential.
Right. And does all in to you mean like you want to work on a few different projects to figure out something that would be that kind of 15-year career kind of, gravitas endeavor, or you're kind of like exploring, playing and kind of figuring it out? Or how do you think about what you maybe hope to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my feeling, so I haven't like gone looking for funding, venture funding or anything for any Nostr projects yet, mostly because I don't have the conviction yet that I've got something that one can be venture scale, and two, that any of us know at all what we're doing. And I kind of feel like, having taken venture money before, and like that experience, from my side was actually quite positive, even though I had to wind the company down. I had a great set of investors who were really supportive and great, but I don't take that lightly, right? Like, I'm taking money off of somebody and I'm setting that money on fire effectively. Like, yes, I'm going to be doing things and hopefully it all turns into an investment, but that pays back. But at the same time, like, you don't want to take that lightly. And so to me, it's like, I've got the ability right now to take a bit of time and like experiment and play and just kind of see where things start to evolve. I think as soon as I feel like I go, okay, I can see how this could, if you really like squint hard, you can see how this becomes a really big business, a venture sized business. I mean, at that point, I won't be shy about asking for money and like trying to pursue it full on. That said, it might not do that, right? Like, I might not end up doing that at all. I might be trying to patch together grants and like some consulting work and other random things just to make sure that I'm still, staying in Nostr, but it might take a lot longer for us to find what those kind of high conviction points are.
Right. And so far I've seen, I think you did Nostr.how was your first big project. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I basically started and created my keys and then went, that was like, I'm technical and that was hard. No one's going to figure this out. And I was like, I'll just write a quick little like microsite. And so it's kind of gone on from there, which has been cool.
And are you still pretty active adding new stuff to it, or it kind of lives and has the kind of get started content that you wanted?
Yeah, I'm trying to add more content. It's hard because now I've got too many projects going and like, it's hard to cycle between so many things, problem of choice. But no, I'm definitely still adding stuff to it. I think the thing that right now, most recently, put a ton of effort into getting it so that it can be multilingual. And so now it's in like French, Spanish, Italian, and English. I'd love to add a bunch more languages there. So kind of hoping more translators will pop up and help me with that. And there's a bunch of guides that I also want to work on. I actually, applied for one of the OpenSats grants around kind of more of an education focused, application, which I really like that whole education space, like trying to figure out how to distill stuff into really, simple, straightforward language that helps people get it quickly. And I think there's a ton more we could do with, Nostr.how and a bunch of the onboarding of new people into Nostr.
Right. You mentioned kind of the open sets. I've heard of it, but I don't know too much about the process. Like, do you write up an application kind of like you're applying to Y Combinator or something, or what is sort of it's
pretty loose. Like, I think everybody kind of, I would be really curious because I've only talked to like one or two other people that have put in grants and like, talked in detail about like what they actually put in their application. I mean, they had some standard questions that you were answering. But there was no like, this should be this long, or you should have, this sort of specifics or anything. And so there's probably a huge degree of variance in what they got back there.
Mm-hmm. And is it meant to be things that are specifically commercial, or specifically things that are non-commercial, or just sort of measuring impact in different ways, or how do they think? I
don't know if they think about it in terms of commercial, non-commercial. My understanding was that it was much more for the non-commercial stuff, but maybe that's not accurate. But I think it's stuff that will benefit the ecosystem around Nostr. And so, developer tooling, education, in my opinion, I think fits great there. I think there's a lot of different projects that, should get funding from this sort of thing. Cause I think the hardest thing right now is there's a ton of people who are super excited about Nostr. And, I'm very fortunate that I've been able to go, okay, I've got a couple months worth of savings here that I can kind of lean back on. But not everybody gets to do that. And so, I would really love to see, grants for, designers and people that can just help on a broad range of things, but let them have full time, time on Nostr.
Right. And are there sets of like educational resources that you would like to see created, or that you'd sort of want to create yourself if you had maybe more resources to do it? Like, I don't know. I mean, like, is there like little, I don't know, application, maybe web or Nostr based applications that help you go through a learning journey, or maybe there's some sort of, high media production video content that would really capture people's imagination or storytelling? Like, do you sort of have in mind specific things that you would like to do with it, or you'd like to accomplish?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, I think very straightforward. Like, I think just having really good onboarding tools, a really simple app that just kind of step by steps a new user that everybody can just be like, you want to get on an Nostr, go here. And, it takes you 3 minutes and you get your keys. It like helps you understand how to manage and like what are keys even, helps you get your profile stuff figured out, and then gives you the ability to find your people on Nostr, right? Because I think at the moment it's like you get dumped in and you've got, you're following Will and that's it. If you start with Damus, and so that's your feed, or you come in there and you're like, whoa, there's a load of Bitcoiners here. And like, I'm not a Bitcoiner yet. These aren't my people. This feels weird. Right. So I think we're getting to the point where we've got a couple teams working on indexers and like ways of filtering through content. I think very soon we're going to have the ability to build a really, really great onboarding tool that, I hope all the clients do some degree of this, but I think irrespective of what the clients want to do, we should have one simple resource that everybody can just be like, here's where you go to set up your stuff and like get a little bit of learning at the same time. Yeah.
Well, that kind of dovetails nicely into this main topic I wanted to hear from you about. So you've been working on this Listr.lol, right?
Yeah.
And in my understanding, and I'd love to just get like ground up, what is a list? How does the NIP work? What are all the details? But can you just tell us like, what is a list that Listr, I think Listr plays a part in helping people create and manage lists, but lists are like a Nostr centric top concept, right?
Yeah. So lists are a completely Nostr native thing. It is just a different kind of event. And I'm blanking on the actual number of the NIP now, but it's there's a couple of kind of standard list types, which 10,000 and 10,001 are kind of a mute and a pin list, which are kind of default naming conventions. And then you've got parameterized replaceable
and
events.
Just to be clear, a mute and a pin, you're talking about one person creating a list that they can then say, I want to mute these other accounts. And then that's like a mute list. Is that right?
Yeah. So these are kind of interesting types or kinds of events, right? So the kind one is an event where you just send it out and you don't get a choice to edit it later, right? Like it's out and it's gone. Your follow list though, and your metadata list and your pin list and your, mute list are all replaceable, which means that, when you create a new one, you're not editing the one that was already out there. You're just sending a brand new event and saying, hey, here's the new list. And all the relays go, okay, we've got it. And in theory, they can just delete all the old ones that they've got. Because really what you want to know is like, what's the latest version of this, list that I've got? And that's the, real one. That's the correct one.
Right.
This is tricky because you're not necessarily guaranteed to get that based on which relays you grab from, right? Like I had this happen to me today. I was like messing around on Listr and I was like, wait, I removed that thing from that list yesterday. And then I refreshed the page and it must have pulled it from a different relay and poof, the right list came up. And I was like, ooh, that's bizarre. Well, yeah, but it's not even delete because you're not telling them to delete things. You're just saying, this is the real one. This is the latest one. This is the right one. And so, yeah, that's the list event kind. And so,
So you mentioned mute and pin.
Yeah.
So mute, I think I get because it's like a list of accounts that I don't want to see things from, presumably.
It's accounts or notes. So you can you can basically put items in those lists that are either people or other notes. So you can mute threads or mute notes, or you can mute people. You can do some really wacky stuff. Like you can put lists inside of other lists. It starts to get a bit strange, and I don't think many clients handle that at all. But in theory, you can do kind of whatever you want, this being Nostr.
And do you typically think of a list as being like this data type that you would use for like consuming, or do you think of it as just like a generalized data type that you use to apply to other consumption lists to like create new views, or what's sort of the right way to think about the purpose of a list?
Yeah. And I guess this is sort of what made me want to build Listr in the first place, was that I don't know that I've got a great answer to that question yet. Right. I think to some degree it felt like, okay, we have a curation problem. Like we have a being able to discover things problem. If you think back to the early internet, products like Delicious and Dig and stuff like that were how we solved that problem before we had these, big tech algorithms and stuff. And so it felt very natural to just be like, oh, that's an obvious one. Like, let's just do it and see what happens. And because lists are a little different than, the standard kind of primitive you would have gotten in Web 2, you end up with, stuff that can be done in slightly different ways. And because these are just events and they're out in the open there, it's easy to just like copy someone's list and take it for your own and, modify it from there. And because you can zap everything, you can zap lists and you can comment on lists and you can, have a discussion about them. So I think the interop and the sort of how these things play together, we're not really sure yet. And that is some of the fun of trying to build a list product like this.
But when you say you have mute lists and pinned lists are two that you mentioned, when I hear those words, to me, they sound like they mean something about how the list should be used. So do they actually have like different functionality, or it's just like a metadata tag that explains what the intention of maybe the list creator had in mind?
Yeah. So mute and pin are the two like default types. And to be honest, like when you look at the NIP, you're like, this was done when whoever wrote this was thinking about Twitter, because those are two like very Twitter concepts, right? You've got your bookmarks list and you've got your mute list.
Right.
What happened after that was that you ended up with, the parameterized replaceable ones where you can give it a name of your own and you can make lists for whatever. And like, to be honest, it would have been smarter just to have gone with the second and left the first out completely. But it's okay. It's part of what we've got. And like maybe over time, the clients just stop really paying attention to those two types of lists, the old ones. And we kind of move to, named lists going forward, but we'll see. But yeah, so I guess the main thing there is those two definitely have kind of a purpose, which is, as you can imagine, mute someone or a thread and pin this somewhere so I can come back and find it, bookmark it. The other two kind of standard numbers that there are is 30,000 and 30,001. And one of those is for people and one of those is for notes, bookmarks. And so in theory, like I said earlier, you can mix and match notes and people in a list. And that's totally fine. But in theory, these both have kind of concepts behind them that say this one's for people and this one's for stuff.
I see. And is each list owned by one and only one person, or can you collaborate on them in some way?
Interesting.
I'm just thinking of like,
you can't really. Yeah.
Let's say that you and I trusted each other's taste in who to block or certain keywords that we wanted to block because we just were annoyed by the same stuff. Or I was like, I think Jeff has good taste. So if I had a client that could say like, let me contribute to Jeff's list because he's already got 100 good things that he's muted that are the same things I basically want mute. And then I could contribute my own to that. And either like I have some partial authorship on it, or you sort of grant or award me some partial authorship on it, but then I can use it and I can contribute to it and you can use it and contribute to it. I mean, it almost seems like a Git like concept where you're the maintainer of the list.
But it's
like
an interesting idea.
Because I
think there would have to be something in the middle, right? I think there would have to be something in the middle there because with an Nostr event, only one key can sign an event. We don't have the concept of like a multi-sig type setup. And so, I mean, that could happen in the future for sure. And we could have events where you need to have two people sign a certain type of event before it actually is valid. So I guess you can imagine a way where that could work. But for right now, no, I think the best you could do would be, one, I could say like merge this list into my list. And we would just basically deduplicate and put them together. And so you can imagine like ways to automate that. But again, you're sort of managing your own list and then copy pasting effectively.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the composability is the best way to do that today versus any kind of like actual joint ownership or multi-sig. Sounds messy.
Yeah. I mean, look, I guess like one way that Listr could solve this is just to keep we could have a database. Like this is what's so cool about like building on Nostr. Like you don't have a backend. Like there just is no backend. You just are like, yep, it's just a website and it pulls all the data like live in that second. And you can cache stuff in the browser if you want, or you don't have to. But if we wanted to, I could stand up a really simple database and, you could just have like a simple list primitive and you could have lists where you would invite other pub keys in to work on them with you. And that would not be a Nostr native thing until somebody went, publish this to, publish this as me, or, and everybody would get the ability to sort of deploy the list as they wanted, whenever they wanted.
Right. If you were to propose something like that with some of the most involved Nostr developers, do you think, are people generally like averse, like, oh, if you're going to do a database, then you're obviously like centralizing and doing something that's inconsistent with the principles? Or would people say, oh yeah, it's like a nice pragmatic way to get things going?
I bet you'd get both sides of that argument.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'd probably end up with both. I guess like it feels minimally centralizing in the sense that, and like, this is one thing that I guess I've put a lot of thought into and I still don't have a good answer for, but like it's not clear to me what this does to business. Like imagine we're insanely successful and this really does like replace a ton of the internet. Like businesses that like we lose all the capture points, right? Like Web 2 is built on this premise of like you own the thing, you get the choke point, and then you can monetize like crazy. And it was always, not on every case, but like it often followed sort of a log trend in terms of it was winner take most, and then there would be like 2 or 3 other players, and that was it. And then everybody else was super teeny. We don't want that anymore. Like that's what Nostr tries to fix. And if that wins, to me, it looks like hundreds of thousands of much smaller businesses, that are sustainable, profitable, earning money, but not employing thousands of people and not having, hundreds of billions of dollars of valuations, or, billions in revenue. And when I think like that, I kind of go, okay, one, that's a future I'm down for. That's great. That would be awesome. But two, where do you draw the line? Like some centralization in terms of like having a database or like a backend makes total sense. And it's just like simplifies the process, and does things that you really can't do with just a simple Nostr primitive. And so to some degree, I kind of go, I think I'm in the middle on that argument. And I can definitely see it. And I understand in places where you're like, I can see how that would centralize. We definitely don't want that. Like I really don't like the fact that we've got just a handful of very large relays right now, and then a lot of very small ones. I think we really need to break that up. And like, I would love to see topic and geography based relays. I would love to see just a lot more relays. But in things like this, where it's like, no, it's just to give like a bit of extra functionality. And then it basically distills back to a Nostr primitive in the end. I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, it also seems like if you had one that was getting very big, it's almost like the centralization of running the database version helps you quickly move on what the thing should be. But then if it got a lot of traction, it could be sort of built into a NIP later.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, I actually agree with that completely.
It necessarily has to get stuck as a database. So maybe database is the way to do like, hey, I'm going to prototype the NIP, but I'm not going to convince a relay operator to integrate it and two clients and try to have this whole discussion. I'm just going to like set up a database, prove that this thing is useful. And then if it turns out to be useful, I'm really like, oh, that's great. Thanks for showing us that that's useful. Now we're going to decentralize it kind of as step 2, right?
Yeah.
And probably that can always be done.
Yeah. That's a great model. I mean, I love that. Like, I think that fits perfectly.
So hopefully I'm always one for like,
so tomorrow I'm building a database. Is that what we're saying?
I'm just one for like pragmatism to like get to the learning faster, even if it means it violates some of the underpinnings, because the learning is more valuable. And as long as it doesn't create a control point that cannot be pushed out later, like I think get the learning fast, as long as you don't do it with a control point and then you can sort of like decentralize it later, as long as it's done in a way that you could imagine can be decentralized later. You're not like, rooting through a website and collecting email addresses to try to like control, important part of the system. But
like one of the things that I think I've talked to a bunch of folks in kind of peer-to-peer trading platforms and stuff recently. And like one of the things that has really, I guess, clicked for me in the last 6 months, but really in the last 4 has been the fact that like data is now not like, for years they were like data is the new oil and like everybody wants to, I think data is actually now a liability, and like businesses are almost better off not having any customer data at all if they can help it, and it's like we provide a service, people pay us for that service and we don't know who they are because it really is getting kind of, it's frightening with, how much control and kind of surveillance most governments want these days. And so I think business is now getting to the point where it's like, you know what, we're fine without this. Like we can build something that functions here without it all.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's a little bit of like a pendulum swing. And so we swung. What is it like when businesses try to, data is the new oil and businesses try to control the whole thing and then let the pendulum swing the other direction and try it with like nobody owns anything and it just like all flows freely like water.
Yeah, for sure.
To the appropriate place. So, back on the list stuff, I think one of the points you were making is that you wanted to make it easier to onboard people to Nostr. Mm-hmm. And to me, lists feel like it's really closely in service of that purpose. So is that the angle you come at it from, or sort of, were you looking at lists outside of kind of the onboarding experience? Yeah,
that's definitely one of the main angles there. For me, I think again, as well, like if we don't have algorithms, people want to find, like there is a natural sort of, shakeout of like who the tastemakers are in different areas, right? Like, you've got your friend who, if you want to know about certain types of music, you go to that person and, just give me your playlists. And I think that's just a natural human thing. And so it feels really simple and familiar and straightforward to go to an app like Listr, kind of look through people. Soon, I think search on Nostr is really hard right now, but like, I'm really hoping to get to the point where I can do a lot more, search and like just kind of falling through the pile of lists that are out there. Because right now it's like, it's very hard to sort of just kind of bump your way through and like find stuff. You really need to know what you're looking for. But I think it's a great way to discover new stuff. I think it's a great way to find, new types of people or new bubbles within, the Nostr ecosystem. Like I spent a little bit of time today, actually, just like a simple one, kind of jumping around through Primal on that sidebar where they're like the people in this conversation and then like other stuff that's been, trending, and just going, I want to follow a bunch of new people. Like it's been a while since I've added a ton of new people to my list, and these like, let's go see what's there. And it was kind of fun. Just, literally poking around, clicking kind of 3 layers in and then backing up and going back down another rabbit hole. And, I think Listr will be a great product for that, because you'll be able to go into lists, you'll be able to flip in and see the feed for all the people in that list to see like, hey, does this look like an interesting feed? This person keeps coming up and they keep saying cool stuff. Let me follow them. But it'll feel natural and feel familiar, I think.
Yeah, that almost sounds like a new structure for assembling a list, which is almost like an auto-generated list.
Yes. And that's like another thing that, again, like once you've got kind of index, the ability to index large volumes of Nostr data, you've got a much simpler way to start grouping that stuff, you know? And I think the just basic classifiers and stuff will do a great job here, where it's just like, hey, show me a bunch of people that show me 20 people who talk about this topic and sort the list by, so only give me the top 20 based on zap amounts. Like that's totally possible. It's not even hard. And so those are, auto lists, smart lists, or whatever you want to call them.
Right. And you were talking about lists as people come to Listr to do the management, but how much of Listr do you imagine is or should be kind of plugged into existing clients versus kind of having people direct nav to the Listr.lol site?
I guess it very much depends on what the client is doing, right? For something like Amethyst, I think has a really good kind of drop down already, where you can select one of your other lists and it'll, populate the feed from that list. I think all clients will have something like that. And it doesn't make sense to me for Amethyst or Damus or whatever to have like a big list management, pile of the product. It just adds a lot more surface area to the product and it's not really the core like use case. So I think for some situations, it'll make much more sense to just link people out and let them manage it somewhere else. I think in other apps, though, it could very much be something where it's like, hey, we do actually need people to manage these things here, or, for whatever reason, and we'd rather just kind of plug in bits and pieces of this. Right.
Have you talked to people, or I guess you must be familiar with this concept that has been floating around all these micro apps and kind of stitching together purpose specific apps kind of within broader app ecosystems or kind of apps as we have them today. Mm-hmm. Is Listr not somewhat of a micro app that focuses on like the management of lists that could live in lots of places?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess if I pared it way down and worked really hard on like the design and making sure it could fit in a ton of different windows and sizes and all the rest, it could easily be almost a plugin for whatever app that wanted to deal with lists. And that, going back to the initial idea of like, how do you build a platform? A lot of the tools that exist on, the Zendesk platform or the Intercom platform or, any of those big tech, company platforms, they are basically plugins. You're just adding a tiny bit of functionality that's really valuable for some group. I guess the problem there is, what's the thing you're plugging into? Because if you think about it from a plugin point of view, you're basically saying someone's the central point that we're plugging into here. And without that, the micro app, like trying to stitch all the micro apps together in a way that is like really user friendly is really hard. And I think
I'm wondering if there's a simple step one, which is, I don't know if you've already talked to a lot of the client developers about potentially integrating like a micro app version of Listr, but is that a discussion you've had that hasn't been received well, or is it just something you haven't really brought up yet?
No, I talked with actually Vitor from Amethyst when I was in Miami last week, and we talked a little bit about lists and stuff, and he was like, "This is awesome. I don't have to build it. I don't have to think about it." He's like, "I'm totally happy to leave the users to go like find and deal with it in another spot." Like we're a reading and interaction and like social platform, so I think there's a spectrum there though. Like, again, like I said, there'll be probably some that want to do it, but I think from like for the main social apps right now, I don't think it makes any sense.
It doesn't make sense for them to integrate your list management, you're saying?
Yeah, because basically, again, lists are the thing that's, identifiable and totally native to the system. And so they can use those lists and they don't have to think about building all the software around it or even plugging it into the product. Because again, like if you think about people who are really big into lists on Twitter, like I wonder how many people, I'd love to see the data on this actually. I wonder how many people actually manage lists from their phone. Like, can you even do that? I'm not even sure. So I've seen this in a lot of different products where like the mobile app or the thing that you're going to be using is very streamlined for like one purpose. And maybe you've got a desktop client or something that does a lot more. Or maybe there's like another interface to it. And I think I would bet more probably on the fact that people's behavior will change to just use different apps for different things instead of trying to cram it all into one thing.
So I was proposing an idea, which I guess is, I think Fiatjaf shared a thing called, have you heard of Keystr?
Keystr, no.
I think it's kind of like a little hack or prototype thing. Maybe Kieran, maybe I saw Kieran's name on it, but I think there was this idea of like, should an app really, like the app at the app layer really be like a key management system, and then everything downstream from key management could be composed of micro apps that do their specific function. So like you could pull in some code to make, like list management is one thing you could do. And then you pull in another thing, which is like profile viewing. And then you maybe pull in another app, which is like, feed rendering or something where, and you can move it all out of one into the next, because it's just kind of key management with this orchestration of micro apps. In which case, like you can do the list stuff really well and other people can do other parts really well. Yeah. Do you find that kind of thing like possible, or is it just too crazy?
Well, that's the browser though, right? I mean, that's kind of what your browser is. Like if you use Alby, it's your key management system, and then you just point it at all these apps that are out there and use it. And I think it takes a little while for new users to sort of get their head around the fact that like, you're signing in with all your same data and all your same notes and all your same events and like access to all those things and the ability to zap in the same way across all these things. But once you get used to it, it's all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is really powerful. This is really easy, and never have to think about logins. I never have to think about any of that nonsense. I'm connected to this wallet that I can use anywhere and everywhere. And all the data is totally interoperable between all these systems. That's already an enormous leap forward from where we are currently. And so to some degree, I'm like, who's going to build the Nostr browser?
Right.
And like literally not do any of the stuff that's old school internet, where you just like open up, whatever the browser's called. I hope it doesn't end in ST. But like, that'll be an interesting one. And like, I wouldn't be too surprised if like someone like Alby didn't try to do that. Right. Cause it would be neat because everybody's always talking about how DNS is like kind of a weird centralizing thing, and how we kind of don't want to get into that too much. This might be one way to do it, right? Like if you had some sort of address system that was Nostr native, all of a sudden you kind of are able to step outside and go, yeah, I've got my old browser and now I've got my Nostr browser, and my Nostr browser manages my keys safely, manages my funds safely, and allows me to connect everything. And like, you can imagine weird use cases where you're like drag and drop between Listr and Damus, like in the same window, because you could just pull them up side by side.
Right. Well, and I wonder if part of the reason we haven't seen like Alby do it yet is because nobody's built all the micro apps for them to orchestrate. So today we have everybody building effectively like social networking apps at the mobile app layer of kind of, that sort of purview, or sort of that window, that granularity. And I think this like Alby type of app, if Alby were to be one to build one, and I think you could have dozens or thousands of these, but Alby would be maybe a credible contender because they actually have key management as core to what they do. But nobody's built like the way to onboard without other UI, or the way to view a feed without other UI, or how to view a profile without like kind of isolated components that could then be orchestrated into an experience. Yeah. So that's actually something Pablo, the Listr thing could be really valuable. Yeah, that's true. And like one thing that Pablo and I've been talking about a bunch, and like we're definitely going to do, it's just a matter of how do we get through all the other things first, is, like NDK, in his mind, and I'm totally with him on this, like we need a developer toolkit that helps maintain the decentralization. Because the trend is it's too easy to centralize. So like we actually have to do work to stay on the decentralized end. There's a bunch of other stuff that kind of layers on top of that, right? So like the NDK is like the very low level, like how do you make programming easier? How do you make building apps easier? UI components. And so, you can imagine like really basic unstyled UI components for every, Nostr primitive out there that are available for a bunch of different, modern frameworks. And so just as simple as being able to go like native, like Swift and JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever.
Yep, exactly. Or even more like, hey, this one's for Svelte. This one's for, React. This one's for, a bunch of stuff that's for the browser. But yeah, for the mobile ones, you'd have those native ones. But yeah, if you had that, you'd be able to say, okay, I need a like avatar. And like, you just like drag and drop this thing in and like change the styling a little bit to fit whatever you want to do. I need a threaded, feed. Boom. And like, everybody's building the exact same thing on the exact same primitives right now. And like, they work a little differently because everybody implemented it a little differently. But like, it'd be great if we were just like, hey, all you new developers that want to build something, here's your Legos, like go to town. Like it's so easy. And you know, some of that depends on the really low level stuff, like being able to cache stuff in the browser without having to think about it too much, or having the data in the same, you know, kind of coming back to the, to these UI components in the same format. And so, you know, you got to start with one to get to the next, but I totally see that being kind of how we bring developers and builders in en masse. Is like, this is the best, you know, most simple way to build apps with, you don't have to have a back end, and you automatically get access to, you know, thousands and thousands of users on day one.
Yeah. And you've got all of the rest of the front-end components except the one feature idea you want, which you can just build that one thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, you don't need to build a new feed experience just because you have a better idea for how you think a profile should work.
Right.
You know,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So this Listr thing, though, one of the things that I think is interesting about it is that it should help a new user get 0 to 1 started and engaged with good content quickly. But unless it has integration points where people are showing up, like unless it shows up in like a, you know, popular apps like Thomas or Amethyst or others, it kind of needs to get very early visibility with users so that within wherever they're showing up, they can just see just show me the world according to Jeff's view. And that's actually like, oh, okay, it's good enough. And I'd also like to add this person, or I want to clone this list and do something different with it. Those are almost like steps you could graduate to, but it seems like the core is just like, show me something good instead of show me just, you know, some one default user or something, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
How do we get there? Is that?
Yeah. So I guess my initial thought there so far is I think we need a really good onboarding client sort of thing that is totally on its own. And there was, I always blank on the name, but there was a guy who built, and I think he won the hackathon from Nostr or whatever, with this like really beautiful site for like helping people do their profiles. I think it's like Nost.me or Nostr.me or something.
Nostr.me or something. Yeah.
It's something like that. Nostr.me. I think that's right. So,
Nostr.me. Yep.
Yeah. So in any case, like that's a really great tool. And I think it's, but it sort of stopped short in the sense of,
if you haven't played with it.
It's really good
playing with it, because it's just like the design is just so beautiful.
Yeah. It's really fun. And like whether it's work with whoever built that and like extend that, I think that we need a much more fully featured, very general onboarding, you know, flow for people. Like I was saying before, like you could just point all new users to this thing and you're like, it's going to take you 5 minutes and you're going to have everything set up and be ready to go. And I think a big part of that is that last step, which is which Nostr doesn't do currently. But using pieces of Listr, you would very easily be able to do, which is, okay, go from, you know, you've got your, you know, profile, you get your keys, you make your profile, you get your photo, you learn a little bit along that path, and then you land on the last screen, which is like, tell us some stuff you're interested about. And we just start throwing, you know, lists of people up to you, and you can just clone them in one click or grab people individually out of them. And you kind of do that 3 or 4 times where it's like, okay, tell me something else you're interested in. All right, let's do this one more time. And once you've done that 2 or 3 times, you've probably got a list of, you know, 30, 40 people you're following. And then it's like the last screen is probably like, all right, where are you going to use this? Like iOS, Android, web, like here's your options, pick a client, go play with it. All you have to do is click log in and your key is going to work. And I think by sort of tightly coupling all the steps at the beginning that way, you can really just give users the feeling of a manicured Web 2 experience that they're used to. But then they get to the end and they kind of understand why it's different and how it's different and like what that allows. And then you just kind of walk away. You're like, well, you're not my user anymore. You're everybody's user.
Right. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
So Nostr.me is one kind of entry point for that. And then you were talking about you mentioned NDK a little bit. I think I just went on it this morning, and is it like under maintenance? Are you guys launching something new? I think it was.
I'm terrible. I've been working on the docs forever. And it's just a lot of stuff. It's like constantly moving because the code underneath is constantly changing. So the idea is we're hoping to get kind of a standalone NDK docs site up that is mostly built. And I mean, if anybody wants to contribute on that, I'm more than happy to take the help. But that's like step 0. Both Pablo and I are really excited to go beyond that and build sort of a Nostr how for developers, where it's got really great guides on like, here's how to build your first Nostr app. Like, here's a very simple, easy to follow kind of step-by-step tutorial, or, make great content for developers. I think the high end of this is like, what if we could build a Replit like product that was Nostr native, that sat there and actually walked people through pieces of the docs and like help them understand how things, work, how they changed. So there's a lot of, again, like, how do you attract the builders? You give them, really great tools and really easy entry points. And you help them get to like a successful outcome very quickly. If you can make something say hello world in the first 30 seconds, you're in, right?
Yeah. I wonder, you mentioned kind of a Replit like experience, which is exciting, but I wonder, like, could you even just have it on Replit as a centralized service, but like help people get started building a Nostr based app even on that? Like, what would it take to get there? And is that part of what you want to do with NDK, or is that kind of a little farther afield?
I mean, I actually was thinking about this today and like trying to write a doc after having a conversation with Artur from Nostr Band the other day. And it was like, I kind of went, you know what, we need to be not quite so, especially with the content and the education side of things, we need to not be Nostr native specifically, because like, if we're just doing everything on Nostr and talking about Nostr to Nostr people already, like, we're not bringing anybody new in. So we need people to make YouTube videos and to make, stuff on other platforms, and to talk about Nostr on Twitter and on LinkedIn and on TikTok and all the, all the platforms where people are. And so, yeah, I think kind of back to our database conversation. Great. Like, if it's already built and we can build something out on Replit real quick, let's do it. And then that way, at least, we load up NDK, we show people how it works. They get it much faster. And then, okay, if that really takes off, like, maybe that's actually a product we could build Nostr native.
Are there types of kind of educational content that you could suggest you'd like somebody to do, but you're not working on, like, kind of a request for content?
I mean, a lot. Like, I guess, on the specifically developer side of things, all of those types of tutorials. Well, I mean, on the developer side of things, let's start with the easiest one. Like, it's just a lot of content to get all of the NDK stuff into a docs site and make sure that docs site is like clean and clear and functions well. Beyond that, we need just, simple guides, step by step. Like, here's a blog post where it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, how to, build a really simple, website that allows for signing in, even something simple. Then turn that into a Replit guide, and then, make a YouTube video of walking through that Replit guide, and talking about it and like giving people a little bit more depth. So I think it's like a question of, what do we need to do? And then how many times can we reuse it across a bunch of different surfaces and change it for the, nature of the medium where you're going to publish it. But, I think it's a matter of just going, somebody who's really prolific building out content. Like, I was thinking about this today. I was like, we need a Nostr marketing department that's like a decentralized, marketing department of people that sort of are, covering the bases and talking to each other, so they're not going over the same thing over and over again. But I think that would be really powerful.
Right. I almost wonder if if you and Pablo were to just screen share and hit record, hop on Riverside or something, screen share, hit record, and just struggle through getting like a hello world set up, and then just click publish, and it doesn't have to be super edited or produced. I wonder if that would actually be a big, I mean, today we're kind of at 0 for this kind of content you're talking about, or, roughly rounds to 0. I wonder if even that would be like a super big unlock to just like, hey, I don't know if you've seen the ones that Andre Karpathy has done. He's done a bunch of great, like, how to train a GPT. He's just like made a bunch of
I haven't seen those. Yeah.
There's a really nice intro. You should check them out, because they're like,
okay,
I think in the same flavor And he just like does screen sharing, and here I'm coding something, but he shows you how to sort of build these skills up from scratch. And I think he just started publishing these, I don't know, like, maybe 6 months ago, or, kind of recently, and they're like really popular. Cause I think a lot of people are interested in those topics. So I could almost see like you and Pablo, whatever you're already doing, just like if you're trying to build out the NDK content, instead of polishing it first, just screen share and do stuff, and then get the video out, and then see, title it well, and probably people will come in and learn about it.
We've definitely talked about it. Like that exact idea. We were like, we should just screen share and like have a conversation and like code some shit and like, talk about it and see what happens. I think we should, like, we have no excuses. We should just do that. We did do a Nostr Nest there a couple of weeks back, on NDK, and it was just like an early, hey, here's what NDK is, like, please check it out. Like if you have questions about it, come and ask questions. I think it was good. Like I was kind of pushing Pablo, like take the first 10 or 15 minutes and like tell people your philosophy of like why this needs to exist, because I don't think everybody necessarily gets to that thought immediately when they think about like, oh, it's just a developer kit, but like there is a philosophy behind like why this matters and like why it really needs to be there. And so he did that, and then we just did questions, and it was great. Like people had really interesting questions and wanted to, kind of hear more about certain aspects of it, or, how stuff worked. So yeah, I think the visual is kind of always better, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. And I think you're probably cautious because you want it to be better than it. You want the production quality to be high, but I think like just having the content out there will help people, and then you can sort of increase production value later if you get really excited about it, or you get annoyed by like, oh, I wish I wasn't saying so much or something.
Yeah. You can cut it. It's totally true.
Cut it later. But yeah, if there's anything I can help with, if you want to sit down and teach me how to make Hello World, I can be your rubber ducky.
Yeah, that might actually be fun. And now that you're like mentioning this, you're like pushing me on it. I'm like, all right, maybe I'll just take a bit of time tomorrow and just sit down and try to go like half an hour. Cause you can get to like the basic Hello World with NDK and just a simple website in a couple of minutes. Like it's not a hard process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be fun to learn. Let's see. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. It's just, sorry, the video just cut out for a moment. So yeah, I know we're kind of at the end of the time we have reserved here, and we gotta probably wrap soon. Just wanted to check: are there other kind of topics or areas of interest that we didn't talk about that we should be learning about you and your work?
No, I don't think so. The main things I'm really focused on now are at the moment are, Nostr.lol, helping out on the NDK stuff as much as I can, and like making sure that that gets used a lot more. And obviously Listr. I think Listr is where I get to scratch the kind of programming itch a lot more. The content stuff, that is kind of, I think, has been kind of a pattern across my entire career so far. It's like, how do I take really technical stuff and make it approachable and easy for people that are much less technical? I really enjoy that. I really enjoy the kind of interaction with, the people that are coming at this with fresh eyes and like hearing that feedback and that sort of thing. I also really like to build stuff. I'm in no way close to like the league of, someone like Pablo, but, I hack my way through it, and, I'm learning a ton as I go, which has been great fun. So I think it's sort of like the perfect balance. It's like, okay, I spend some time doing, these educational things. I spend some time just headphones on hacking away, and it, sort of gives me the flip back and forth that I need.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, I want to thank you for making the time to come and hang today, and congrats on all the progress. And I hope, it feels like there's just going to be so much changing week by week, and I want to keep in touch on all of it. So keep me looped in as new things are happening, and love to keep the conversations going.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, yeah, thanks so much.